Are Americans actually better off right now than they were just over a year ago? Not politically, not ideologically, but in real life. At the gas pump, at the grocery store, in their sense of safety, in how stable the world feels around them. You see, before this last election, I have a friend who lives in the United States, and I asked them, I said, who are you voting for? Are you comfortable telling me? And they said, absolutely, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And I said, what are some of the reasons? Just help me understand where this comes from. And they said to me, well, I want better gas prices. I need groceries to be cheaper. And I need somebody who's not going to start wars. Now, if you look at it this way, gas is higher, groceries are still climbing, global tensions are rising again, and the United States is back in conflict. And beyond that, something else is happening that's harder to measure, but maybe easier to feel. Allies aren't as aligned. Trust isn't as automatic. And stability feels weaker than it used to. So, you'd think the answer would be obvious, but it's not. Welcome to The Ordinary Effect. I'm your host, Guido Perino, and we are exploring today two Americas, one reality problem? Maybe. Look, if you ask this same question to millions of Americans, you might get a completely different answer. You might hear that things are stronger now, more controlled, finally moving in the right direction. Same country, same moment. Two completely different realities. That's the real story. You see, once you move past the surface of prices and politics, what starts to emerge is something much more complicated and much more unsettling. What we're watching isn't just economic strain or political disagreement or even global instability. Look, those things matter, but they're not the core issue. The deeper issue is that people are no longer starting from the same understanding of what's actually happening. The foundation itself has shifted, maybe eroded. And when the foundation shifts, everything built on top of it becomes unstable. If you look at everyday life, the signals are there, not in dramatic spikes, but in steady pressure. The kind that doesn't shock you, but wears on you. It shows up in small decisions that start to change. Maybe someone drives a little less. Maybe they rethink a purchase. Maybe they feel just a bit less secure than they did before. None of that feels like crisis, but over time, it adds up to something that's harder to ignore. It becomes a pattern, and eventually, it becomes the new normal. That's the part people often misunderstand about decline. It doesn't arrive as a single event. It settles in gradually until once felt temporary begins to feel permanent. At the same time, there's a broader shift happening beyond individual experience, one that's harder to see from the inside, but clearer from the outside looking in. For decades, the United States didn't just operate as a country. It operated as a point of reference. Allies didn't always agree with it, but they understood it. They could predict it. And that predictability created trust. But trust is not a fixed asset. It has to be reinforced over time. And when direction begins to shift, sometimes sharply, sometimes unpredictably, that trust doesn't disappear overnight. It changes more subtly. Allies begin to hedge. They start making decisions that assume the United States may not always be as reliable or as consistent as it once was. You don't see that in the headlines right away. You see it in behavior, in quieter, more cautious alignment, in decisions made with little more distance built in. That's what a loss of influence actually looks like. Not rejection, but recalibration. And yet, despite all this, the economic pressure, the shifting global position, the sense of instability, there are still millions of people who look at this exact moment and see something entirely different. They see strength, control, progress. And that's where this stops being about policy and starts being about psychology. Because human beings don't experience reality as a neutral stream of facts. We experience it through meaning, through identity, through the lens of who we believe ourselves to be. And once politics becomes tied to identity, it stops being something we evaluate and becomes something we protect. At that point, information is no longer just information. It becomes something else. It becomes something that either reinforces who we are or challenges it. And when it challenges it, we don't always respond by reconsidering. More often, we respond by rejecting. Now, layer on top of that the way people now consume information through curated feeds, through media ecosystems that reflect and reinforce their existing views, and something even more powerful begins to take shape. Two parallel realities. Not because people are incapable of understanding facts, because they're receiving different versions of them, filtered through different frameworks, reinforced by different communities. Inside each of those environments, the worldview feels complete, coherent, confirmed. And once you're inside that loop, stepping outside of it is just difficult. It comes with a cost. It can mean questioning your community, your assumptions, even your sense of belonging. So most people don't step outside. They stay within the version of reality that feels consistent. There's also something deeply human at play here, something that has nothing to do with politics specifically. Certainty. People are drawn to it. Simple explanations, clear answers, defined causes. In a world that feels complicated and unstable, certainty provides a kind of relief, even when it's incomplete, even when it leaves things out, because emotionally it feels solid. Reality, on the other hand, is rarely that clean. It's layered, contradictory, and often uncomfortable. And that discomfort creates space for narratives that simplify, that clarify, that make things feel more manageable than they actually are. And those narratives can take hold quickly, especially when they align with identity and are reinforced by the environment that people are in. The result is not disagreement, it's divergence. A country where people are no longer arguing from different perspectives on the same reality, but from entirely different starting points. And that has consequences, because when people can't agree on what's happening, they can't agree on what needs to be done. Progress doesn't stall because solutions don't exist. It stalls because consensus doesn't. And while that internal divide continues, the external world doesn't pause. Other countries adapt. Alliances evolve. New structures begin to form. And the United States, instead of shaping that evolution, risks reacting to it. Not because it lacks power, but because it lacks alignment within itself. So the question becomes, how does a country turn that around? Not quickly, not easily, and not through a single election or a single leader. Because this isn't just political, it's structural, it's cultural, it's psychological. It begins with something that sounds simple, but is incredibly difficult in practice. Rebuilding a shared baseline of reality. Not total agreement, that's unrealistic, but agreement on fundamentals, on facts that aren't constantly in dispute. From there, it requires a shift away from identity-driven politics, where disagreement doesn't immediately translate into division, Externally, it means reestablishing consistency, not through messaging, but through sustained behavior over time. And internally, it comes back to something very real, very tangible: everyday life. Because people don't live in policy, they live in experience. If costs remain high, if stability continues to feel uncertain, if pressure doesn't ease, no narrative from any side will hold indefinitely. And that may be the most important point of all. The real risk for any country isn't just that things get worse. It's that people can no longer agree on whether things are worse. Because once that happens, the problem isn't just economic or political anymore. It's foundational. At that point, you're no longer asking how to fix things. You're asking something much harder. Can we even agree on what's broken? That is The Ordinary Effect. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Guido Peraino. If you don't subscribe, please subscribe. Love to have you here on a regular basis. Take care.